She was 19 years old when she decided she was gonna change medicine forever. A Stanford dropout with a black turtleneck, a whisper of a voice, and an idea so bold that the smartest investors in the world handed her $9 billion. Her name was Elizabeth Holmes. Her company was called Theranos, and every single thing she told the world was a lie. A lie that didn't just erase fortunes, it put real patients in danger, with real blood and real results that were never real at all. This is how one woman convinced the entire world to believe in something that never existed. In 2003, a 19-year-old walked away from Stanford University with nothing but an idea and an almost unsettling certainty that she was right. Elizabeth Holmes had grown up terrified of needles. She hated the idea of waiting days for medical results that could save a life. So she asked herself a question that no one in Silicon Valley had the audacity to ask before. What if a single drop of blood could tell you everything from a fingertip, in minutes, at a pharmacy down the street? She didn't speak like a founder. She spoke like a prophet. And Silicon Valley, a world that had already watched a college dropout named Steve Jobs rewrite reality, was ready to believe again. The black turtleneck came first, then the unnervingly deep voice, deliberate, measured, like every word was a secret she was slowly letting you in on. Journalists started noticing, then investors, then the world. Forbes put her on the cover. Fortune called her the youngest female self-made billionaire in American history. Time named her one of the most influential people on the planet. She was everywhere, and she said almost nothing, which somehow made everyone want to hear more. The board she assembled read like a fever dream of American power. George Shultz, former Secretary of State, James Mattis, decorated general, Henry Kissinger, William Perry, men who had shaped geopolitics sat in her boardroom and nodded. Walgreens signed a partnership. Safeway followed. Her Edison device, a small, sleek machine that would supposedly run hundreds of tests on a single drop of blood, was placed in real pharmacy locations, used on real customers. Patients walked in, gave their fingers, walked out with results. No one asked how it actually worked. That was the point. In Silicon Valley, the mythology of the lone visionary had reached a kind of religious intensity. You didn't interrogate the prophet, you funded her. And Elizabeth Holmes knew exactly how to play that role. But behind the glass walls of Theranos headquarters in Palo Alto, something else was happening. The Edison machine, the device that was supposed to revolutionize medicine, didn't work. Not reliably, not consistently, not in the way the world had been told. Tests run on the Edison produced wildly inaccurate results. Results that told healthy people they might have cancer. Results that sick people they were fine. The margin of error wasn't a technical inconvenience, it was a clinical catastrophe waiting to happen. So the company found a solution. They ran the real tests on conventional machines, industry-standard analyzers that any normal laboratory would use. And when patients received their Theranos results, they had no idea their blood had never touched an Edison at all. Inside the company, secrecy wasn't a policy, it was an atmosphere. Teams were siloed deliberately. Engineers in one room had no idea what chemists 3 doors down were working on. Employees who asked too many questions found themselves in HR offices, then, suddenly, no longer employed. Non-disclosure agreements were brutal and total. Speaking to journalists, even friends, even family, grounds for termination and legal action. There was a word used internally, quietly, by people who were afraid to say it out loud: fraud. Validation reports submitted to pharmaceutical partners contained data that had been manipulated or simply invented. Demonstrations given to potential investors were staged, the machines performing in controlled conditions they would never replicate in the real world. When Walgreens sent its own medical team to evaluate the technology, Theranos managed the visit down to the minute. Nobody saw the real numbers. Nobody was supposed to. And for years, it worked. If stories about billion-dollar lies and corporate deception fascinate you, subscribe now. The next story is even darker. The cult had a beautiful face, and a convincing story. But underneath it, the machine was failing, and real people were getting results that were wrong. The question was, how long until someone said it out loud? His name was John Carreyrou, a Wall Street Journal investigative reporter with a reputation for patience and a refusal to be impressed by branding. In early 2015, a tip arrived. Someone inside Theranos, a former employee, wanted to talk. Then another. Then another. They spoke in fragments at first, careful and frightened. These were people who had signed agreements that could bury them financially, people who had watched colleagues get fired for asking questions, people who had left jobs they believed in only to realize, slowly, that what they were building was not medicine. It was theater. Carreyrou started pulling threads. He cross-referenced patent filings with what the company claimed publicly. He found doctors and independent lab scientists who examined the technology from the outside and came back with the same answer. The science didn't add up. He tracked down industry experts who had been quietly skeptical for years, but had no platform, no proof, and no one asking. Now, someone was asking. When Theranos caught wind of the investigation, the response was immediate and aggressive. Lawyers called the Journal. Lawyers called sources. Elizabeth Holmes reached out personally to the paper's top editors, requesting meetings, demanding the story be killed. Her legal team, led by David Boies, one of the most feared attorneys in America, sent letters designed to intimidate anyone who spoke on record. Former employees who had already spoken to Carreyrou received calls. Some were threatened, some went silent, but not all of them. On October 15, 2015, the Wall Street Journal published its first investigation into Theranos. The headline asked a simple question about whether the company's technology actually performed what it claimed. Within hours, the story was everywhere. The scientific community erupted, investors made phone calls, board members received briefings, regulators started pulling files they had left unopened. And Elizabeth Holmes went on television, calm, unblinking, utterly composed, and called it a lie. She had spent a decade convincing the world that she was the future. She had one move left: deny everything. But the story didn't go away. Stories like this never do, not once the first crack appears. Walgreens froze its partnership, then terminated it entirely. The Edison devices were pulled from pharmacy locations quietly, without announcement, as if they had never been there. Patients who had received Theranos tests were notified that their results might be unreliable. Might. That careful, devastating word, might. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services launched a formal inspection of Theranos' Newark laboratory. What they found was catastrophic. Testing practices that posed immediate patient risk. Equipment operated by staff who lacked the qualifications to use it. An environment, in the words of the report, that was fundamentally inconsistent with patient safety. Elizabeth Holmes was banned from operating a clinical laboratory for 2 years. The valuation that had once touched $9 billion began to dissolve in real time. Investors who had written checks, Rupert Murdoch, the DeVos family, the Walton family, watched hundreds of millions of dollars become worthless. Partners disengaged. The board that had once been a symbol of power became a liability. Members began stepping back, issuing statements, making sure their names appeared elsewhere. The SEC opened an investigation, then the Department of Justice. In 2018, Elizabeth Holmes and her former partner, Ramesh Balwani, were indicted on federal fraud charges. The government alleged that they had knowingly deceived investors, partners, and patients, that they had taken money on the basis of claims they knew were false. The offices that had once hummed with the energy of a company that was going to change the world went quiet. The Edison machines sat unused. The black turtlenecks were photographed as artifacts. And the $9 billion, all of it, every last valuation dollar of it, was gone. In January 2022, Elizabeth Holmes was convicted on 4 counts of fraud against investors. She was sentenced to 11 years and 3 months in federal prison. Ramesh Balwani received nearly 13 years. The appeals went on for years, but the verdict didn't change. In the aftermath, Silicon Valley did what it always does after a collapse of this magnitude. It reflected, it wrote op-eds, it updated its language, moving slowly away from fake it till you make it towards something that sounded slightly more cautious. But the deeper question, the one that lingers, is not about Elizabeth Holmes. It is about everyone who watched. Experienced investors who performed no meaningful due diligence. Board members with access to every resource in the world who never asked to see a working demonstration. Regulators who deferred to prestige. Journalists who wrote profiles before they asked for evidence. A culture so hungry for the next Steve Jobs that it handed billions to someone who had learned, above all else, how to look the part. She sold a vision so precisely calibrated to what people wanted to believe that believing it felt like intelligence, not naivety. The machine never worked. The story did. Which billion-dollar lie should we uncover next?